White girl wears a fuck black people shirt in court. The black judge's verdict left her screaming. Chelsea McBride had never been in the back of a police car before, at least, not in handcuffs. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in the darkened windows, illuminating her furious, disbelieving face as she thrashed against the cold steel biting into her wrists. Her long blonde hair, usually immaculate, was tangled from the scuffle at the gas station. Her breath reeked of alcohol, her pulse hammering in her ears. But the overwhelming sensation consuming her wasn't fear. It was rage. "This is bullshit," she spat, kicking at the seat in front of her, her voice a slurred mess of entitlement and fury. "Do you even know who my father is?" The officer driving the car didn't respond. He didn't have to. The weight of the situation was settling in, pressing down on her like a vice. But Chelsea refused to acknowledge it. Her father wouldn't let this happen. He never did. Even now, as the events of the past hour replayed in her mind, it didn't seem real. It had started with a drunken impulse like most of her worst decisions. The night had been a blur of neon lights, overpriced cocktails, and the kind of reckless abandon that only came with the knowledge that there would be no consequences. Chelsea McBride didn't get in trouble. Not real trouble. She had been arrested before, sure, but it never lasted. A well-placed phone call, a firm handshake, and suddenly the charges disappeared. Tonight was supposed to be no different. She hadn't even noticed Denise Johnson at first. The gas station had been mostly empty, just another late-night stop before heading home. But then she'd caught Denise looking at her just a glance, nothing more. And for some reason, in her alcohol-clouded mind, that had been enough. "What the fuck are you looking at?" Denise hadn't even reacted at first, which only made Chelsea angrier. She had stepped closer, invading Denise's space, her words growing sharper, louder, slurred by the whiskey burning in her throat. "Think you're better than me?" Chelsea had sneered, the venom in her voice thick. "Think you can just stand there and judge me?" Denise had exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "You're drunk. Walk away." It wasn't the words that set Chelsea off, it was the tone. Calm, dismissive, like Denise wasn't even considering her a threat. That simple act of indifference had ignited something ugly inside her. Before she even realized what she was doing, her hands shot out, shoving Denise hard in the shoulder. The tension in the air had snapped like a live wire. Denise had stumbled but hadn't fallen. Instead, she had held her ground. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time that night, Chelsea felt something foreign creep into her drunken haze. Doubt, but it was too late to back down now. "Come on, hit me," Chelsea had taunted, a twisted grin pulling at her lips. "I fucking dare you." For a moment, Denise had just stood there, her hands balled into fists at her sides, her breath measured. Then finally she spoke. "You're not worth it." The dismissal sent Chelsea into a blind fury. Her fist lashed out, fast and wild, connecting with Denise's jaw. The impact sent a sharp pain up her arm, but she barely felt it. The rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of landing a blow, drowned out everything else. For a split second, the world seemed frozen. Then Denise's head snapped back into place, and Chelsea barely had time to register what was happening before Denise struck back. The counterpunch was swift, controlled not a brawl, but a calculated response. Chelsea stumbled back, shocked, furious. No one hit her, no one fought back. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Then came the sirens. Chelsea had expected them to drag Denise away, expected the cops to take one look at her blonde, rich, important, and know who the real victim was. But instead, they had handcuffed her. The realization hit like a slap to the face. But even now, sitting in the back of the squad car, Chelsea refused to accept it. They had to be making a mistake. Her father would fix this. He always did. Chelsea had never faced consequences, not real ones, the kind that left a permanent mark, the kind that changed lives. Born into privilege, raised in the comfortable bubble of wealth and influence, she moved through life with an effortless arrogance, secure in the knowledge that she would always land on her feet. Her father, a former police chief, had smoothed over her indiscretions too many times to count underage drinking, reckless driving, a shoplifting incident that would have been a criminal charge for anyone else. Her uncle, a powerful judge, made sure that when her name appeared on any police report, it vanished just as quickly. Chelsea lived with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. But tonight, everything was about to change. The squad car pulled up to the station, and as the officers dragged her out, the flashes of camera phones illuminated the night. People were recording. People were watching. She barely heard what the officers were saying as they led her inside, her mind still reeling. None of this made sense. This wasn't how it worked. This wasn't her reality. A cold realization slithered through her stomach. This was happening, and for the first time in her life, Chelsea had no way to stop it. As they led her through booking, past the rows of holding cells filled with women who didn't look like her, who didn't have the luxury of assuming they'd be bailed out before morning, Chelsea felt something she hadn't felt in years. Panic, the fingerprinting, the mugshot, the confiscation of her belongings, all of it blurred together in a whirlwind of disbelief. By the time she was shoved into a holding cell, the last traces of alcohol had begun to wear off, leaving her with a splitting headache and a sickening realization. She reached for the phone on the wall, her fingers trembling as she dialed the one number she knew would save her. It rang once, twice. Then her father's voice came through, low and heavy. "Chelsea," relief flooded her. "Dad, listen, this is bullshit. You need to get me out of here. They arrested me over nothing. Denise Johnson. I know who she is." The way he said it made something tighten in her chest. "Dad, come on," she pressed. "Fix this. You always fix this." A long pause, then finally his voice, quieter this time. "Not this time, Chelsea." The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the wall as the finality of those words settled over her like a death sentence. For the first time, Chelsea McBride was truly, utterly alone. Chelsea sat in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, arms crossed over her chest, her jaw tight with anger. The humiliation of being arrested, of being treated like some common criminal, gnawed at her like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. She had spent the night in this disgusting cage, surrounded by people she would never associate with, her privileged world crashing down around her. But none of it mattered, not really, because she knew this was temporary. Her father would pull some strings, her uncle would make a few calls, and by this time tomorrow she'd be sipping a mimosa at brunch, laughing about this ridiculous overreaction. Still, something about the way the officers had looked at her, the way they had barely acknowledged her protests, unsettled her. They weren't supposed to treat her like this. They were supposed to respect who she was. Then she heard the name, Malcolm Graves, the judge assigned to her case. Chelsea's lips curled in disdain. A black judge. Not just any judge, a notoriously strict, no-nonsense hardliner. She had heard of him before, seen his name in articles about how he had no tolerance for disrespect in his courtroom. The media painted him as a fair and tough judge. But Chelsea knew exactly what that meant. It meant he'd love the chance to make an example out of her. A McBride. That thought alone sent a fresh wave of fury rolling through her. Who did this man think he was? Some self-righteous savior of the oppressed? Some moral authority who thought he could punish her, like she was one of the criminals he usually dealt with? She wouldn't let that happen. If they wanted a spectacle, she would give them one. Chelsea leaned back against the wall, smirking to herself as an idea began to form a bold, reckless, spectacularly defiant idea. If Malcolm Graves wanted to treat her like some insignificant nobody, she would remind him exactly who he was dealing with. By morning, when they allowed her to make a phone call, she didn't call her father. Not yet. Instead, she called Trevor. "Babe, I need you to do something for me," she purred, her voice sickly sweet despite the steel underneath. Trevor wasn't the brightest, but he was loyal to a fault. And most importantly, he never questioned her. She gave him clear instructions. Bring her a white t-shirt, plain, no logos, and a Sharpie. Trevor hesitated, probably confused, but she had no patience for his slow thinking. "Just do it," she snapped before hanging up. By the time she was released on bail the next morning, Trevor was waiting outside the precinct, a sheepish look on his face as he handed her the bag. "What's this for?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. Chelsea didn't answer. She just yanked the Sharpie from the bag and, with slow, deliberate strokes, began writing across the front of the plain white shirt. When she was finished, she held it up, admiring her work. Bold, unapologetic, designed for maximum impact. FCK, Black People. Trevor's eyes widened. Jesus, Chelsea. Relax, she smirked, rolling her eyes. It's just words. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but thought better of it. He knew better than to challenge her when she was like this. Chelsea pulled off her designer blouse and slipped the shirt over her head, smoothing it down with satisfaction. She wanted cameras on her. She wanted gasps. She wanted Malcolm Graves to seethe in his seat. This wasn't just about making a statement. It was about proving a point. She was untouchable. They could throw her in a cell, slap cuffs on her wrists, treat her like garbage for a night, but they would never control her. Let's see how a black judge handles this, she thought, her smirk widening as she walked toward the courthouse. The moment Chelsea McBride stepped through the courtroom doors, the air shifted. A ripple of tension spread through the crowd like a shock wave, thick and suffocating, pressing down on every person in the room. It was the kind of silence that wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a vacuum, a void, an unbearable weight. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every pair of eyes snapped toward her. The jurors, the audience, the lawyers, all frozen in place. A black bailiff standing near the entrance tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster, his jaw tightening as he read the words emblazoned across her chest. His nostrils flared, his fingers curling into a fist before he forced himself to exhale. On the other side of the room, a woman sitting in the gallery clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. A murmur swept through the audience, hushed but electric, like a distant rumble of thunder before the storm broke. Phones were raised, cameras clicking, the artificial glow of screens illuminating the stunned faces of those recording history in real time. And there in the front row, Denise Johnson sat with her back rigid, her breath shallow, her dark eyes locked onto Chelsea's with an expression that wasn't just shock. It was disbelief. It was the look of someone who had seen cruelty in many forms, but never quite like this. Chelsea saw it and smiled. She loved this. The attention, the reaction, the barely contained outrage vibrating in the air. It was exactly what she wanted. The way they were all looking at her, horrified, furious, speechless, was the reason she had done it in the first place. Her gaze finally landed on Judge Malcolm Graves. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't even shifted in his seat, but Chelsea could see it. The barely concealed fire smoldering beneath his cold, calculating gaze. For a long, excruciating moment, he simply studied her. Not like a person, like a specimen under a microscope, a disease spreading before his eyes. Then slowly, with a deliberate precision that made every movement feel lethal, he removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the bench before him. His fingers steepled together, his expression remaining unreadable, but his eyes burned. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. "Miss McBride." 2 words, but they rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. Chelsea tilted her chin upward, her smirk widening. "Approach the bench." The murmurs grew louder. Someone in the back let out a soft gasp. A legal assistant sitting near the prosecutor dropped her pen, the small clatter unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet. Chelsea didn't hesitate. She walked forward with the same careless confidence that had carried her through life, her every step echoing against the polished floor. Her designer heels clicked like the ticking of a bomb. She reached the defense table and leaned against it casually, as if this were all a minor inconvenience, as if she were about to order a drink at a bar instead of standing trial for a crime. Judge Graves studied her again, the silence stretching unbearably long. Then finally he spoke. "Would you like to explain yourself, Miss McBride?" Chelsea arched a brow, lips curling. "Explain what exactly?" She gestured toward her chest, as if the words scrawled across her shirt were nothing more than a joke at a college frat party. The judge's expression remained impassive. "Your choice of attire." Chelsea exhaled dramatically, rolling her eyes. "It's just a shirt." Judge Graves didn't react. His voice remained calm, measured, deadly. "Then explain why you chose to wear it in my courtroom." Chelsea's smirk sharpened. "Oh, I don't know," she drawled. "Ever heard of the First Amendment?" A sharp, collective intake of breath. The boldness of the statement, The sheer audacity. Chelsea reclined against the table, folding her arms over her chest, her fingers tapping lazily against her forearm. Freedom of speech, Your Honor. Ring any bells? Something shifted in Judge Graves' expression. Not anger, not outrage, something colder. He leaned forward slightly, his hands still clasped together. I see. Chelsea McBride stood at the defendant's table, her smirk flickering ever so slightly as she waited. Waited for what she knew was coming. She had won. She could feel it in her bones. This was a joke, a show trial, a desperate attempt to make an example out of her, but it wouldn't work. It never did. She had sat through the whole proceeding with an air of bored amusement, arms crossed, rolling her eyes as the prosecutor droned on about community impact and reprehensible behavior. None of it mattered. Not the footage of the gas station fight. Not the testimonies. Not even Denise Johnson sitting in the front row, her face an unreadable mask. The verdict was inevitable. She would get probation, maybe a bullshit community service order, some joke of a sentence where she'd have to pick up trash in a neon vest, pretending to be sorry for the cameras. But jail, please. That wasn't how the world worked for people like her. She glanced at Judge Malcolm Graves, waiting for him to say the words she had already prepared to shrug off. Miss McBride, it is the decision of this court that you be sentenced to. Her lips curled. 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. There it was. She nearly laughed. The tension in the room seemed to break. Her attorney let out a small breath of relief. The reporters scribbled in their notebooks, some disappointed, some nodding as if they had seen it coming. Chelsea was already planning her exit. She'd flash the cameras a smug little smile, step out into the sunlight, and let her father's legal team squash any lasting damage. But then Judge Graves spoke again. However, the word cut through the courtroom like a scalpel, sharp and precise. Chelsea's stomach twisted. Your behavior in this courtroom has demonstrated a complete and utter disregard for the gravity of the situation. Your actions show not only a lack of remorse, but an outright contempt for this court, for the legal process, and for the very concept of justice. His voice was steady, measured, but Chelsea felt it like a hammer against her ribs. The murmur in the audience grew louder, whispers crawling through the rows of seats. Chelsea's pulse spiked. This wasn't part of the script. In light of your attitude today, I am modifying your sentence. A pause. You will serve 90 days in county jail, effective immediately. No bail, no early release. For a moment, Chelsea couldn't process it. The words hit her like a blow, but the pain didn't register right away, only a dull, creeping sense of wrongness. Then, the explosion. The courtroom erupted. A collective gasp, then a wave of voices crashing over one another. Reporters shot out of their seats, scrambling for their phones. The audience broke into chaos, some stunned, some murmuring in agreement, some grinning as if they had just witnessed history. Her attorney's chair scraped against the floor as he bolted upright. Your Honor, I must object. Chelsea's body locked up. Her breath caught in her throat. And then it hit her. No! The word ripped from her throat before she could stop it. No, 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 you can't do this. She stumbled forward, hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table. Her vision blurred with rage. This isn't fair. Judge Graves didn't flinch. Bailiff, he said, his voice even. Absolute. A towering black officer stepped forward. Chelsea's breath hitched. No, you don't get it. This isn't how it works. Panic clawed at her chest, wrapping tight around her ribs. Her father, her uncle, the power they wielded. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen, but Graves was unmoved. Miss McBride, you will be taken into custody immediately. If you continue to disrupt this court, I will add contempt charges to your record. She shook her head wildly, her breath coming in sharp gasps. You can't. My father will fix this. She spun to her lawyer, expecting him to do something, anything, but for the first time she saw it. The defeat in his eyes, the understanding. This was happening. The bailiff reached for her arm. Chelsea screamed, "Don't touch me!" She lashed out, yanking away, knocking over a stack of legal documents in the process, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. A second bailiff stepped in. Cold steel clamped around her wrists, handcuffs. For the second time in 48 hours, Chelsea McBride was shackled like a common criminal. She twisted, struggled, her mind spiraling. "This isn't fair," she shrieked. "I didn't do anything wrong." The cameras flashed. The reporters scribbled. The world watched. Denise Johnson, still seated in the front row, exhaled. Not in victory, not in satisfaction, just relief. Judge Graves tapped his gavel once. Next case. And just like that, Chelsea McBride's world ended. Chelsea kicked and screamed, thrashing against the iron grip of the bailiffs as they dragged her through the corridor. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the reality of what had just happened slammed into her like a freight train. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted her name, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the laughter, the whispers, the satisfaction of those who had wanted to see her fall. "This isn't over," she shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am?" The officers didn't react. They had seen this before. Rich girl, spoiled, screaming because, for the first time in her life, there was no one coming to save her. Chelsea's mind raced, her pulse hammering against her ribs as they shoved her into a holding cell. The door slamming shut with a finality that made her stomach drop. The room was small, suffocating gray walls, a metal bench, a stench of sweat and disinfectant that made her gag. No, no, no. This wasn't real. This was a bad dream, a nightmare. Any second now, the phone would ring, a guard would come in and unlock the door, and this whole thing would be erased. Her father would fix it. He always fixed it. She stumbled toward the payphone mounted on the wall, her hands trembling as she picked up the receiver and punched in the only number that mattered. It rang. Once. Twice. Then finally Chelsea. Relief flooded her, hot and overwhelming, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "Dad, thank God. Listen, they're trying to put me in jail. Can you believe this? You have to do something. Call the DA. Call the governor. I don't care, just get me out of here." A long silence, then a sigh, a slow, heavy exhale that sent an icy shiver down Chelsea's spine. "I can't help you this time, Chelsea." The words knocked the air from her lungs. She blinked. Her mind rejected them. "What?" "No, Dad, you don't understand. You always fix things. You always—" "Not this time." The weight of those 3 words crushed her. Chelsea shook her head violently, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "You're my father. You can't just leave me here." "I warned you." His voice was low, tired. "I told you to stop, to think. But you never listened, Chelsea. Dad, please. Goodbye, Chelsea." The line went dead. The dial tone screamed in her ear. But nothing was louder than the silence inside her. For the first time in her life, Chelsea McBride was truly, utterly alone. As the prison gates slammed shut behind her, Chelsea felt the last remnants of her old life disintegrate. The cameras were gone. The reporters had moved on. The world outside no longer cared. Now there was only this place, and in here she wasn't Chelsea McBride, the privileged daughter of a powerful man. She was fresh meat, and the wolves were waiting. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, urine, and something stale, something rotten. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie, sickly glow over the cracked concrete walls. Rows of bunk beds lined the space, occupied by women who didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't bother to hide the way they sized her up. She felt the weight of their stares, sharp and calculating. Chelsea lifted her chin, forcing herself to walk with confidence, with defiance, but every instinct inside her screamed run. A guard shoved her forward. "Welcome home, sweetheart." His voice dripped with mockery. The clang of the cell door slamming shut behind her felt like the final nail in her coffin. She barely had time to set her mattress down before she heard the footsteps. Slow, measured, predatory, a shadow loomed over her. Chelsea turned, heart hammering, and came face to face with a woman who looked like she had been carved out of stone-broad shoulders, muscular arms covered in ink, a jagged scar running down her cheek. She grinned. "You're the rich bitch." It wasn't a question. Chelsea's spine stiffened. She wasn't about to let some prison thug intimidate her. "Who's asking?" A fist came out of nowhere. The punch landed hard, knocking Chelsea back into the wall, her skull slamming against concrete. Pain exploded behind her eyes, a blinding, nauseating wave that made the world spin. Then came the second blow, and the third. Hands grabbed at her like hungry wolves descending on fresh meat. Her hair was yanked back, sharp nails clawing at her arms, her stomach. A knee drove into her ribs, stealing the air from her lungs. She tried to fight back, tried to swing, to scratch, to kick, but she was outnumbered. Laughter echoed in her ears, the sharp snap of her head jerking from another punch. Her body hit the cold floor. Boots kicked into her ribs, her back, her thighs. Her vision blurred. She tasted blood. "Not so tough now, huh?" a voice sneered. She barely registered the words. Then a whistle, sharp, loud. The attack stopped. Chelsea lay there, curled up, coughing, her body trembling. Boots shuffled. The guards were approaching. Too late, too uninterested. "All right, that's enough. Get to your bunks." The crowd dispersed, laughing, muttering, some still smirking at her crumpled form. Chelsea couldn't move. She lay there, face pressed against the grimy concrete, gasping, her entire body screaming in pain. Welcome to hell. Chelsea learned quickly that her name meant nothing here. She wasn't Chelsea McBride, daughter of a police chief, niece of a judge. She was just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. The guards treated her with thinly veiled contempt. "Look at the princess," one of them sneered when she struggled to lift her food tray with bruised arms. "Not so special anymore, huh?" Another tripped her in the yard, sending her sprawling onto the dirt. Laughter erupted around her. She burned with humiliation. Everywhere she turned, someone was watching, waiting. She couldn't even shower without feeling like she was being hunted. She kept her back against the wall, flinching every time someone moved too close. They wanted her broken, and they were getting closer. Chelsea lasted 3 days before she snapped. She hadn't spoken, hadn't fought back. She had swallowed the humiliation, the pain, the whispers. Then in the cafeteria, someone shoved her. Hard. Her tray clattered to the ground, food spilling everywhere. Laughter. That was it. Before she could stop herself, she swung, her fist connected with bone. The woman, a tattooed brunette with a wicked grin, staggered back, stunned. The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Tables overturned, fists flew. The guards were there in seconds. Chelsea fought like a wild animal. Then came the baton, the sharp crack of it striking her back, her legs, her ribs. Her body crumpled, pain exploding like fireworks behind her eyes. Voices shouting, a knee pressing her face into the floor, the cold bite of cuffs tightening around her wrists. "You think you're tough?" a guard hissed in her ear. "Let's see how tough you are in the hole." Chelsea had never known true isolation until she was thrown into the hole. A small, suffocating box of concrete and shadows. No window, no sound, just darkness. Time stopped existing. She didn't know if it had been hours or days. She paced. She screamed. She banged on the door until her hands bled. No one came. The voices in her head started whispering. "You don't belong here. No one is coming for you. You're nothing now." Chelsea curled into a ball on the floor, her body racked with shivers, with exhaustion, with something worse than fear, hopelessness. She wasn't Chelsea McBride anymore. She was just another prisoner, and for the first time she truly understood what that meant. Chelsea lay on the grimy concrete floor, her breath coming in shallow, pained gasps. Blood dripped from her split lip, mixing with the sweat and filth that coated her skin. Every part of her ached, her ribs, her arms, her face all screaming from the savage beating she had just endured. Laughter still echoed in the air, fading as the crowd dispersed, leaving her broken and humiliated. She wanted to move. She couldn't. Then a shadow loomed over her. Boots stopped inches from her face. A presence she hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to command the space without saying a word. Chelsea forced herself to look up, blinking blood out of her eyes. And then she saw her, Denise Johnson. For a moment, Chelsea's mind refused to accept it. This wasn't possible. Denise wasn't supposed to be here. Denise was supposed to be free. Yet there she stood, taller, stronger, unshaken. Chelsea tried to sneer, to spit out something sharp and venomous, but her body betrayed her. She could barely lift her head. Denise crouched down slowly, resting her elbows on her knees as she studied Chelsea with cool, unreadable eyes. There was no pity there, no sympathy, just control. Chelsea's stomach twisted. "You look surprised," Denise murmured, her voice low, deliberate. Chelsea hated how steady she sounded, how calm, like she had already won. "You thought you were done with me?" Denise tilted her head, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. Chelsea forced herself to swallow the bile rising in her throat. "What the hell are you doing here?" she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Denise exhaled sharply, almost amused. "Same reason as everyone else. Bad choices, bad luck." Chelsea didn't believe that for a second. Denise didn't move like someone who had been swallowed by the system. She didn't shrink like the others. She stood above them. And that was when Chelsea noticed it the way the other inmates watched Denise. Not with disdain, not with pity, with respect, with fear. Realization crept into Chelsea's bones like ice. Denise wasn't just another prisoner. She was somebody in here. A flicker of movement from the side. The woman who had beaten Chelsea, the one who had kicked her ribs in, who had laughed in her face, stood silent now, waiting for Denise. "That's enough," Denise said, finally standing. And just like that, it was over. The other inmates didn't argue, didn't hesitate. They obeyed. Chelsea's pulse pounded. Denise turned to go, but then she paused. She glanced back, eyes meeting Chelsea's with something hard, something final. "From now on, whether you live or die in here," she leaned in, her voice a whisper of steel, "that's up to me." And with that, she walked away, leaving Chelsea alone with the unbearable truth. She had lost everything. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for supporting us. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Chelsea sat alone in the prison yard, her back pressed against the rough concrete wall, knees pulled up just enough to keep her posture guarded, but not weak. The sun burned against her bruised skin, but the real heat came from the stairs drilling into her from across the yard. She wasn't safe. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She had survived the first few weeks, but barely. The bruises had faded, but the fear had not. Every time she walked past the other inmates, she could feel them watching, waiting. She knew what she was: a rich girl in the wrong place, a privileged outsider thrown into the deep end. And she was drowning. The air around her shifted. She didn't see them at first, she felt them. A presence, heavy, deliberate. Then the shadow of boots against the dirt. "You got a minute?" Chelsea stilled. She looked up slowly, blinking against the sun, and there they were. 3 of them. White, heavily tattooed, built like they had spent years turning rage into muscle. The Aryans. She had seen them before. Everyone had. They controlled the white inmates. They ran the drugs, the contraband, the fights. The guards left them alone. Not because they were afraid, but because they were useful. Chelsea's stomach tightened. "You've been having a rough time," one of them said. Tall, broad, arms lined with inked swastikas and SS bolts. He wasn't offering sympathy, just stating a fact. Chelsea didn't answer. "That can change." The man crouched in front of her, his movements slow, measured like a wolf circling wounded prey. "You want to survive in here?" His voice was calm, almost friendly. "You got to pick a side, and lucky for you, we're willing to help you out." Chelsea knew what this was: an offer, a threat, a promise. She glanced toward the yard where the others were still watching. Not just the white inmates, all of them. Denise sat at a nearby table, arms crossed, gaze locked on the scene unfolding before her. Judging, waiting, knowing. Chelsea forced her voice to stay steady. "And if I say no?" The man's smile barely flickered. "Then you won't last long." Simple. Undeniable. The message was clear. This wasn't a choice. Chelsea exhaled, forcing down the nausea rising in her throat. This was survival, and she wasn't ready to die. She looked up at the man and nodded. "I'm in." The first time it made her sick. The second time it was easier. By the third, she stopped thinking about it. It started with small things carrying messages, standing beside them in the yard, letting the others know she was no longer fair game. Then came the real tests. She knew what was coming before they even said it. Time to earn your keep, Reed told her one evening, his voice filled with amusement. We got a little job for you. They led her to the back of the common area, where a trembling black inmate knelt on the floor. His lip was already split, his nose bleeding. Just a few punches, one of the Aryans said. Show us you belong. Chelsea's stomach clenched. She wanted to run, to scream, to tell them she wasn't this. But the memory of being beaten, being humiliated, being nothing was stronger. She raised her fist, and she swung. Chelsea's knuckles ached from the impact. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gas, adrenaline burning through her veins as she stepped back, watching the inmate crumple to the ground. The Aryans stood around her, their grins wide, their eyes gleaming with something dark approval. Not bad, McBride, Reed said, cracking his neck. You're learning. Chelsea's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stand tall, to keep her expression cold, indifferent. She had done what they wanted. She had proved herself. The woman on the ground, some junkie who had crossed the wrong people, groaned, clutching her ribs. Chelsea didn't look at her. She couldn't. That's enough, Reed said, nudging Chelsea's shoulder as he walked past. For now, just like that, it was over. No one cared. No guards came rushing in. No justice. Just another act of violence buried under 100 others. Chelsea had crossed the line, and there was no going back. It didn't stop there. The Aryans had a system, a hierarchy, a business. And Chelsea? She was useful. She was invisible to the guards, overlooked by the other gangs, which made her the perfect mule. Just a few packs of cigarettes, they said at first. Then it became pills, powder, needles. She knew if she got caught, if she made one wrong move, she wouldn't walk out of this prison alive. But by then, it was too late to turn back. This was survival. This was the choice she had made. And then, one day, Denise saw her. It happened in the yard. Chelsea was mid-exchange, slipping a small wrapped package into another Aryan's hand when she felt the stare. She turned and met Denise's eyes. It wasn't anger she saw, not hatred, just disappointment. Denise stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching like she already knew how this would end. Chelsea's stomach twisted. She forced herself to look away. But Denise wasn't done. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough so only Chelsea could hear. You think they really got your back? Chelsea's hands curled into fists. They do. Denise let out a soft laugh, not amused. No, they don't. Chelsea glared at her. You don't know anything. Denise's expression stayed calm, steady, certain. I know exactly what you are to them. She leaned in closer, her voice like a blade against Chelsea's skin. A pawn, a tool, a disposable piece on their board. Chelsea's throat felt tight, dry. She wanted to tell Denise she was wrong, that she had control, that she mattered. But Denise just shook her head. I hope you're ready for when they decide they don't need you anymore. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Chelsea alone with the one truth she couldn't escape. Chelsea should have known. She should have seen it coming. She had done everything they asked, delivered packages, thrown punches, kept her mouth shut, but it was never enough. It was never going to be enough. That morning, Reed cornered her in the yard, his smirk as cold as the steel bars that kept them locked inside. Time for you to prove where you really stand, McBride. Chelsea didn't answer. She just waited. Reed's eyes flicked toward the far side of the yard. Denise! Chelsea's stomach dropped. She's been getting too comfortable, he continued, his voice casual, like he was discussing the weather. It's time we remind her where she stands. And you? His smirk widened. You're gonna be the one to do it? The world blurred. Chelsea's mind screamed, no, 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 but she didn't say it. She couldn't. Reed's gaze sharpened. Something wrong? Chelsea's mouth went dry. She couldn't breathe. Denise. Denise, who had saved her once. Denise, who had warned her. Denise, who now sat at a table across the yard, completely unaware that Chelsea had just been given a choice: betray her or be destroyed. You hesitate, you die, one of the Aryans muttered beside her. Chelsea forced her voice steady. I need time, Reed laughed. Time? You don't get time, McBride. You get orders, and you follow them. Chelsea's hands clenched into fists. "Do it today," Reed said, "or don't bother coming back." She didn't do it. She couldn't. And by nightfall, she paid the price. They came for her in the dark. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No guards rushing in. No alarm. Just cold hands dragging her from her bunk, slamming her onto the floor before she could even fight back. Pain exploded in her ribs. A boot connected with her stomach. A fist cracked across her jaw. Over and over and over. Chelsea tried to fight, tried to scream, tried to breathe, but they didn't stop. "You don't get to say no to us, McBride," someone hissed in her ear. Another blow, this one to the side of her head, blinding pain erupting behind her eyes. Then darkness. When she woke up, she was somewhere worse than before. No light, no sound except for the faint, distant drip of a leaking pipe. She was back in solitary confinement. But this time was different. This time they weren't letting her out. They didn't bring food, didn't check on her, didn't care if she lived or died. Time stretched and collapsed in the blackness. Chelsea pressed her back against the cold wall, legs pulled to her chest, head buried in her arms. She wanted to be angry, to be defiant. But she was too tired. She had nothing left. And for the first time since stepping into this prison, Chelsea McBride cried. When they finally pulled her out of the hole, she couldn't even walk. Oh, she was weak, trembling, starving. They dragged her to the common area, shoving her forward until she collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. Chelsea barely registered the sound of a chair scraping back, of footsteps approaching. Then a shadow over her. She lifted her head, her vision still blurry, her body still shaking. Denise. Her face was hard to read, but her eyes. God, her eyes. Chelsea let out a broken, gasping breath, humiliation burning through her. She had nothing left to say. And Denise? Denise just watched, not with pity, not with anger, just disappointment. Chelsea had survived. The beatings, the humiliation, the betrayals, she had endured it all. But as the final day of her sentence arrived, she didn't feel victorious, because deep down, she knew the real punishment was just beginning. The metal door slammed open, and for the first time in 90 days, Chelsea McBride stood on the other side of the prison gates. Freedom, or at least what was left of it. The sun was blinding, burning against her skin after months of cold, artificial prison light. The air smelled different, fresher, cleaner, but somehow it still felt heavy. Her heart pounded. She should feel relieved. She should feel victorious. But instead, she felt nothing. Chelsea stepped forward, her prison-issued shoes scuffing against the cracked pavement. She was holding on to a brown paper bag, her only possessions. A few wrinkled dollar bills, a cheap plastic toothbrush, a bus pass that led nowhere, and no one was waiting for her. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. The screen cracked from the months it had spent in an evidence locker. She hesitated. Then she called the only number that had ever mattered. It rang. Once, twice, then a familiar voice. "Chelsea." Her breath hitched. "Dad, I can't help you." No hesitation, no emotion, just finality. "Dad, please. I have nowhere to go." "You made your choices," he cut in. His voice was firm, steady, merciless. "Now you live with them." A long silence. Then the line went dead. Chelsea's fingers went limp, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. She had been hoping for this, for some kind of last-minute forgiveness, a lifeline, anything. But he was done with her, and there was no one else to call. Chelsea staggered into the nearest bus stop, slumping onto the metal bench. The city buzzed around her cars, honking, people talking, the world moving on without her. She wasn't part of it anymore. She was an outsider, a stain, a mistake. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through old texts, searching for Trevor. Her last message to him had been months ago. "Babe, please, pick up." She opened his contact and dialed. It rang, but he didn't answer. A voicemail. "The number you have called is no longer in service." Chelsea's stomach twisted. Her eyes flicked to social media. She typed in his name, and there it was. A new profile picture. Trevor smiling, arms wrapped around someone else. Chelsea's chest tightened. She clicked the comments. "Congrats, bro, she's gorgeous. When's the wedding?" Her lungs felt too tight. The world blurred. Trevor was gone, moved on, like she had never existed. She squeezed her phone, staring at the photo until her vision burned. Hours later, Chelsea walked into the first store she could find. A small cafe, warm and buzzing with life. She needed a job. She needed something. The manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, glanced up from the counter. "Can I help you?" Chelsea swallowed, forcing a smile. "I'm looking for work." The woman hesitated, sizing her up. "You got experience?" "Yeah, I worked at a—" Then the woman's eyes flicked down, to the tattoos, the Aryan ink still visible on Chelsea's wrist. Her stomach dropped. The manager's expression changed. She knew, and just like that, it was over. "Sorry, we're not hiring." Chelsea tried again, and again, and again. Each time the same thing. A glance at her record, a glance at her tattoos, a glance at her, and then rejection. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Chelsea had nowhere left to go. She sat on the curb, arms wrapped around herself, watching the city move without her. She thought about going back to the prison. At least there, she had food, a bed, a place to exist. But she wasn't welcome there either. She was nowhere. Chelsea McBride had once been untouchable. Now she was just another ex-con with nowhere to go. And for the first time since walking out of that prison, she wondered, had she ever really been free at all? Chelsea's feet dragged against the cracked sidewalk, her body aching with every step. She had nowhere to go. The exhaustion ran deeper than just her limbs, it was in her bones, in the hollow pit of her stomach, in the way her mind raced with no answers, no solutions, no hope. She had spent the night huddled against the back of a convenience store, trying to block out the bitter cold and the distant sounds of the city moving on without her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, maybe the day before. Time had blurred, dissolving into an endless stretch of rejection, hunger, and fading strength. She pulled the thin hoodie tighter around herself, her once pristine nails now chipped and dirty, her face gaunt from weeks of living on scraps. Every now and then, she passed a restaurant or a cafe, the warm glow of the inside world so painfully out of reach. No one looked at her, or if they did, they looked away. She had become something people ignored. She kept walking, even when her legs screamed for her to stop, even when she didn't know where she was going. Then something caught her eye. A massive billboard loomed above the intersection, its bright lights cutting through the dull gray of the morning sky. At first, it was just another advertisement, another distraction in a world that had long since stopped belonging to her. But then she saw the face. Familiar. Unmistakable. Chelsea's breath caught in her throat. Denise. Denise Johnson. Her face stretched across the billboard, glowing with confidence and power, her arms crossed, her expression determined. And beneath her name, bold letters spelled out the words that slammed into Chelsea like a freight train. Attorney Denise Johnson, fighting for justice. Chelsea staggered backward, nearly tripping over the curb. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This isn't real. It had to be some kind of sick joke. She stared up, eyes wide, unable to process what she was seeing. Denise, the woman she had attacked, the woman she had tried to destroy. The woman who had walked into that prison and made Chelsea feel smaller than she had ever been in her life. Now she was everywhere, not just surviving, thriving. The very world that had swallowed Chelsea whole had lifted Denise higher. Chelsea felt something twist, deep and sharp. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Because this was the proof. Proof that Denise had been right. She had been right about everything. Chelsea had once believed she was untouchable, unstoppable, that her name, her family, her privilege would carry her forever. But in the end, it had meant nothing. She had been chewed up, spat out, left to rot. And Denise? She had risen. Chelsea tore her eyes away, shoving her hands deep into the pockets of her hoodie, her fingers trembling. She started walking again, faster this time, as if she could outrun what she had just seen. But the truth followed her. It always would. Chelsea staggered forward, her legs trembling beneath her, the weight of everything crushing down on her all at once. The hunger, the exhaustion, the endless rejections, it all led to this moment. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her vision swimming as the world around her blurred into a chaotic swirl of light and motion. The billboard of Denise's face still burned in her mind, taunting her, mocking her with a cruel, undeniable truth. Denise had won. Chelsea had lost. The realization hit her harder than any fist ever had. Her knees buckled. The sidewalk rushed up to meet her. She collapsed. She barely felt the cold concrete beneath her. The world had faded into numbness. People walked past her, not even pausing. Not a single glance. Not a single offer to help. Because no one saw her anymore. Chelsea McBride, once powerful, once feared, once untouchable, was nothing. She pressed her palms against the pavement, trying to push herself up, but her arms shook too much. She had no strength left. Her body was failing. But worse than that, her mind was breaking. She had spent her whole life believing she was special, that the world would always bend to her, that no matter what she did, no matter who she hurt, she would always come out on top. And yet here she was, on her knees, on the streets, alone. No family, no friends, no future. The girl who had once mocked the weak had become one of them. Her lip quivered, her throat tightening as something foreign, unfamiliar, terrifying clawed its way up from deep inside her. She fought it, she refused. But it came anyway, a sob, raw, ugly, then another, and another, until she was crying openly, gasping for air between choked, desperate sobs. No one cared. Not the father who had once shielded her from consequences. Not the boyfriend who had promised her forever. Not the friends who had laughed at her cruel jokes, fueled her ego, cheered her on when she was at the top. They were all gone. Because Chelsea McBride wasn't important anymore. The world had moved on without her, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be nothing. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Chelsea McBride's downfall did not unfold in a single cataclysmic moment. Rather, it was a slow unraveling of everything she had once held dear, shaped by every slight and every act of contempt she had inflicted upon others. She believed her money and her family's influence would shield her from the consequences that ordinary people faced. Arrogance was her armor, and she wielded hate like a weapon. But when she assaulted Denise Johnson, a woman she deemed beneath her, all those illusions began to crack. At first, Chelsea was certain she would walk free. She strutted into the courtroom with her hateful shirt, expecting the judge to be swayed by her last name. Yet Judge Malcolm Graves, unmoved by her entitlement, handed down a 90-day sentence that left her speechless. Her father's influence, her uncle's connections, none of it stopped the clang of the prison gates. She was swallowed by a system she had always believed was for other people. Inside those walls, she was just another inmate in orange. Arrogance became a liability. On her first day, she tasted blood in her mouth as fellow prisoners reminded her that her privileged past held no currency here. The guards ignored her pleas, and her bunkmates eyed her with scorn. But the worst shock came when she saw Denise again. Denise carried herself with a poise that startled Chelsea, as though she were untouchable in a place where everyone else felt caged. Denise didn't tremble or flinch. She simply observed Chelsea, neither gloating nor cowering, leaving Chelsea with a deep sense of shame. In desperation, Chelsea joined a white supremacist gang that demanded total obedience. She delivered contraband, beat down targets they selected, and traded her soul for a shred of protection. Every blow she landed called to mind that original assault on Denise, as if each act of violence replayed her darkest moment. The gang saw her as a pawn, and when she hesitated to attack an inmate, they turned on her. The beatings, the solitary confinement, and the cold echo of her own regrets trapped her in a cycle of desperation. Late at night, she lay awake, replaying every decision that led her to this prison bed, knowing she had chosen hate at every turn. When her sentence ended, she walked out with a paper bag of belongings, expecting at least a flicker of relief. Instead, she found no one waiting. Her father had cut ties, her former boyfriend had moved on. She called old friends who once cheered her every petty cruelty, but they had distanced themselves. Now unemployed and alone, she drifted through a city that had no place for an ex-con with hateful tattoos and a stained reputation. She applied for jobs, but each attempt ended with the same polite rejection once they recognized her name or noticed the ink that marked her past. One day, starving and exhausted, she spotted a towering billboard bearing the determined face of Denise Johnson, now a prominent civil rights attorney. The billboard declared, "Denise Johnson fighting for justice." Seeing Denise's face was like a punch to the gut. The woman she had belittled, the one she had tried to destroy, had risen to a position of respect and power. Denise's calm eyes on that massive sign reminded Chelsea that hate never leads to victory. Chelsea stumbled away, grappling with an emptiness that she had never known. She collapsed on a curb, pressing her head against her knees as the truth settled in. She had lost everything. She was once untouchable, but arrogance had dragged her down into a pit deeper than any prison cell. Her illusions were gone, and the life she had cherished was a distant memory. Alone and hungry, she realized the worst punishment was not prison. It was facing a world that had moved on without her. She had no family support, no job, and no sympathy. She was a cautionary tale, a living testament to the poison of hate. Pride had kept her from seeing the harm she inflicted, but now it was gone, and in its absence she felt only regret. Perhaps if she had chosen empathy instead of cruelty, she might have built something meaningful rather than smashing lives under her heel. But the time for if only had passed. She could not undo the bruises she'd inflicted or the torment she'd caused. Somewhere, Denise was thriving, fighting injustice, championing people who had been knocked down by a system that Chelsea had once used to her advantage. Denise's triumph wasn't about revenge, it was about channeling pain into purpose. Chelsea understood that better than anyone, her own suffering had begun to open her eyes, showing her that arrogance was flimsy scaffolding. Hatred had devoured her from the inside, leaving her empty-handed. She found a ragged piece of cardboard in an alley and used a marker to scrawl a plea for help, standing on a street corner with trembling hands, drawing glances of pity or disgust from strangers. Each day, the city felt bigger, more indifferent, and her place in it smaller and more precarious. Late one evening, she wandered into a shuttered storefront for shelter, huddling in the dark, with only her regret to keep her company. She thought back to her privileged life, the mansion, the fancy cars, the circle of people who once nodded in agreement with everything she said. Now she realized how shallow it all had been. Those people had never cared for her. They only cared about the benefits her name could bring. The moment she lost her power, they vanished. She was left with a battered sense of self, unsure if redemption was even possible. In this spiral of despair, one singular lesson glowed like an ember in her mind. Hatred never brings victory. Justice finds a way. Those words echoed with every bleak sunrise. She had hated Denise, but it hadn't made her stronger. It had led her to the bleakest corners of human cruelty. Meanwhile, Denise had fought for justice, and that path had led her to a billboard overshadowing the city skyline, an emblem of courage. That was the final blow, the undeniable truth that Chelsea could no longer escape. She rose at dawn, determined to face this new reality with whatever scraps of courage she had left. She was done crawling. She took the bus to a community center she'd heard might offer assistance to ex-inmates. The battered interior was nothing like her old life, but the volunteer at the desk offered a cup of coffee and a list of possible housing options. It was a small kindness, but it felt enormous, like a door cracking open. Though the volunteer recognized her from news reports, he didn't recoil. He simply set a job application on the table and told her to fill it out carefully. Tears pricked her eyes at the simple gesture of acceptance, so different from the scorn she'd faced. Chelsea sat there, pen in hand, wrestling with shame and hope. She didn't know if she could rebuild. She didn't know if she deserved to. But she thought of Denise's relentless courage, of how she had been the victim of Chelsea's violence, yet had risen above that cruelty to become a champion of justice. Maybe that was the blueprint. Maybe the only way forward was to acknowledge her darkest chapters while striving to be better than the person she had been. She clung to the conviction that the only real future worth having was one guided by empathy, Her once certain belief that she stood above everyone else had cost her everything she valued: family, love, security, even her own sense of self. She was a living example of how arrogance corrodes from within. Meanwhile, Denise's example showed that resilience and moral conviction have a power that hatred can never match. In the end, Chelsea's story stands as a stark warning. Hate may provide a brief, intoxicating sense of superiority, but it rots you from the inside until nothing remains but regret. And justice, though sometimes delayed, has a way of cutting through illusions and leaving truth in its wake. To anyone willing to listen, Chelsea would offer the message she had learned so painfully. Hatred promises dominance, but delivers destruction. Compassion, justice, and empathy lead to growth and redemption. The old Chelsea would have scoffed at these ideas, laughing in the face of mercy. But the new Chelsea understood that there is no victory in crushing others. The only true triumph is forging a world where dignity and fairness stand above all else. She had once imagined herself at the pinnacle of power, yet the real power belonged to those who fought for justice. Hate had taken her freedom, her pride, and her place in the world. It had not taken her capacity to learn. In that, she found her fragile sense of hope, determined never again to bow to the cruelty that had led her astray. Hatred never leads to victory. Justice always finds a way. Justice cannot be twisted, bought, or silenced. Chelsea McBride thought she was untouchable, but justice found her. Denise Johnson, once her victim, rose above hatred and became a champion for truth. Chelsea lost everything, not just her freedom, but her very identity. Hate never wins. It destroys the one who carries it. If you believe justice always prevails, that no one is above the law, and that truth will rise no matter what, then stand with us. Like and subscribe if you believe that justice cannot be erased. Justice will always find its way.